This lecture is on attribution persuasion given prior to the attribution persuasion assignment. External attribution. Attribution theory is how we explain somebody's behavior, whether our own or whether others. External attribution is attribution that occurs when we explain someone's behavior through a situation, through something that's happened to them, through some outside force. Internal attribution is when we explain someone's behavior with some issue about their character, of who they are as a person, either inside or also outside, with the color of their skin or their race or gender or sexual orientation. Defensive attribution is when we want to defend our own beliefs about ourselves and about others and the world. And so with defensive attribution, sometimes we do it when we defend our own beliefs. Like if we believe that we're not a failure, but we know we might not do well on a test, we might do some other thing like play video games all night. And then when we fail the test, we can blame it on playing video games all night. We also want to defend our beliefs about the world. We want to believe that the world is just, which leads us to the just world phenomenon, which we want to believe that the world has true justice. And so when bad things happen to good people, that suggests that the world doesn't have true justice. So instead of changing our beliefs about the world, we attribute their behavior internally, that person's behavior that had something bad to happen to them internally, and say that it's a problem with their character, either a failing of their morals or their work ethic or responsibilities or etc. This leads us to the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error says that when people do bad behavior, a lot of times they will attempt, when someone else does bad behavior, we will explain it through an internal attribution. We're saying there's a problem with that person. But in truth, most of the time it's external, it's situational. But we don't want to believe that when we see it from other people. We can take that idea and apply it to the actor-observer bias. The actor-observer bias says that we, when looking at someone else's bad behavior, it's always going to be internal. It's a problem with who they are. But when we do a bad behavior, it's due to a situation. It's never a failing in our character. And then finally, we're going to take that idea and apply it to the self-serving bias, where we say that when we do something bad, it's situational. There's always some sort of outside force that causes that bad behavior. But when we do something good, it's internal. And it's something that we can attribute to how good we are as a person. Once we've developed an attitude, we try to convince people to share our beliefs, our attitudes, or convince people to do a behavior which goes along with our attitudes. And so there's a number of different methods of persuasion or methods of compliance. The central route to persuasion says that we use logical arguments and facts to convince people to change their beliefs or change their behavior. The peripheral route says we're not going to use facts at all. Instead, we're going to attempt to tug on your emotions or tug on your feelings about things to get you to change your behavior. But it's never going to be about the actual thing that you want to do. The foot in the door phenomenon says that we're more likely to comply with a request if we've already complied with one first. So the foot in the door phenomenon says if we get someone to comply with something really simple and small, then they're more likely to comply the next time with a larger request. The door in the face phenomenon says exactly the opposite, where it says that if we get rejected with a large and unreasonable request, then a person's going to be much more likely to comply with a much smaller request. And so if we start off with something that's just not reasonable for that person, but then you follow it up with something that seems very simple and a lot more reasonable, then they're going to be much more likely to comply. Sometimes once people comply, they may find that the method of persuasion wasn't completely truthful. The lowball effect says that when we comply with something, a lot of times there are additional things added on. So like, for example, if you ask someone to close the refrigerator and then you ask them to make you a sandwich, that would be an additional thing that would maybe change how they complied previously. The bait and switch says that sometimes we're promised something good, some sort of reward when we comply. But then once we do it, we don't actually get that reward. And again, that would affect how if we knew that in the first place, that would affect how we would comply. The framing effect says that when we want someone to comply, we need to frame it in a way that seems like it's going to benefit them and not harm them. The mere exposure effect says that the more time we spend with something, the more likely we are to develop an affinity for it. And the reciprocity norm says that when we do something for somebody else, then become more likely to do something for us. I scratch my back, you scratch you. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That kind of idea, where people are more likely to comply if they've had their requests complied with prior. And that's where we finish.